Hi guys, welcome to the latest podcast of YarninBlak. Today I've got a really special friend of mine on, Leilani. I'll introduce you to her in a minute. But first I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm currently calling in from. I'm here in Ball and Kew on the land of the Wurundjeri people, the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay respect to elders past, present, and those young warriors of our future that are going to lead us into the future. But I'd also like to acknowledge any other Aboriginal people that are joining us today, including my special guest, Leilani. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, AJ. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks for coming. I know how busy you are, and I'm glad that you've come on, and we'll talk a little bit about more work. But first, tell us who you are and where you're from.
Thanks. My name's Leilani Darwin. I'm Noonuccal Quandamooka woman on my mum's side of the family, part of the stolen generation. So it's only been about 5 years ago. Maybe that's an exaggeration since I found out where my mob are from. I also come from a family of immigrants. So my grandfather and grandmother immigrated with 7 children from Burma, and my great-grandfather was a full-blooded Indian man, and my great-grandmother was a full-blooded French woman. I am based here and wanted to pay respect to the Jagera, Yagara and Yugambeh people in Ipswich in Brisbane as well, and ancestors and elders and the spirits that continue to guide us in the work that we're doing today.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school?
Brisbane and too many schools. Mainly in Brisbane. I spent a year in Sydney after my mum died. My uncle that was down there offered to take me, to help ease the load with me and my 2 sisters, and we all kind of went somewhere different. But honestly, it was just too hard being away from them and being away from where I grew up from. So I was there for a year, but mainly in Brisbane, mainly in the more, what do we say, socioeconomically disadvantaged areas. My mum, was a single mum with a lot of mental health issues and challenges, and she was an alcoholic. And so places like Riverview, Wacol, Darra, different places around the time, but we moved a lot essentially. So lots of different schools, which kind of taught me how to be flexible and adaptable to new social situations and environments, I guess. Yeah.
Growing up at school, how much Aboriginal studies did you actually learn at school?
Oh, next to nothing. Next to nothing. And, until I think like some of the younger years, we were actually based in Paddington. So Petrie Terrace State School was a place I went to, and I still remember to this day the Aboriginal support teacher aide in there. And she was like one of a handful of black fellas there, always most of the spaces that I've been in, just been the only black fella. And despite my now light skin, thank you, sun safety education, when I was younger, I was like real dark, like really dark. I'm always like laughed when my nephews and that were growing up, and I'd show them photos and like, that's not you, Arnie, that person's black and you're white. Like I had that much good pigment going on, whereas not so much now. But no, I don't think there really was much of any. I think in some of the more diverse areas, so when I went to Riverview State School, they definitely did more of it there, which I really enjoyed. And that was because they just had such a culturally diverse, kind of student population and demographic in those areas. So that was good. We did have days where we were able to really kind of acknowledge that.
Do you think over time in the schools now, there's more Indigenous perspectives put into place? Or do you think we still need further and more?
It's interesting, having actually worked in Queensland in the Indigenous Education Unit, and looking at the issue being is that it depends on the school, because there's still it's optional whether they choose to do it. But what I will say is that I've seen a massive increase from particularly the early years in learning, and I've seen that with my non-Indigenous friends and their kids, and they'll start asking me questions when I see them around culture and mob, and they'll be like, oh, they're learning about this right now. And so I'm seeing there's certain areas in education, in kindy and, you know, all that kind of stuff where people are making a conscious choice and effort to provide those insights and perspectives to our young ones coming through. But it's definitely not consistent. It's definitely still, I think, from my perspective, a point of contention in the education system.
Now, did you finish high school?
I did. I went to grade 10.
Okay.
Because
and what did you do
after that? So my deal was with my auntie, if you're not going to school, you're working or you're learning.
Yeah.
And I was like, sweet. So I was probably, I think, one of the last couple of years where you could technically finish in grade 10. So I enrolled in a Cert 2 in retail that went through to past when school started, and I got a part-time job. So I just kind of took it from there. But I will also say that later on, after I had my daughter, I did complete a diploma in counselling.
Cool. And I know that your background for a long while has been in mental health. And that's how I first met you, I think in 2013 or 2014. So we're going back 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, when you decided you wanted to become a mental health first aid instructor.
Yep.
What made you want to do mental health, or what made you want to become a mental health first aid instructor?
There was a couple of factors that led into it, and I was working in corrections, and I learned I originally went in there to be a counsellor. Then before I started, I was like, oh, well, we need you to be counselling supervisor. And then they were like, oh, we need you to coordinate the multicultural centre. So I was delivering programs and services and stuff to mob in there. And I realised that a lot of mob, there were certain points in their lives of typically losing someone to a sudden death, and unfortunately mostly suicide for those that I had experiences with, that the cycle of things, no one came in and supported them when they were younger. And I had an opportunity to work with Headspace, and I was like, right, I'm shifting gears. I want to get in there where I experienced my most, severe and my attempts at suicide were as a young person. So that is kind of like what got me started in that area, that and the ability to actually do stuff that was led by mob and that was really built on that social emotional wellbeing model, and being able to support young ones and look at, I guess, a mainstream organisation willing to go on that journey to support their local young people in the community.
And since that, you've actually held a lot of constant roles or leadership roles in places like Beyond Blue, Lifeline, Black Dog Institute. My question is, what do you like about, I think it's really great that they're involved Aboriginal people in the discussions, because obviously we weren't in the discussions before. But what attracts you to wanting to be involved in those organisations?
So the reason that I have chosen over the years to work with mainstream organisations is to see what change I can affect in there. How can I bring other people on a journey, people who were receiving funding to do research, evaluation, program and service delivery for our mob? How can I support and ensure that things are being set up and done the right way culturally, that we have the leadership in that the governance is right, and that they're even considering or asking the right questions. And so that is the main reason why I've chosen to do that.
And you also became the founder of the First Nations Co as well.
Mm-hmm.
What made you decide to start your own company?
I think it was the years of the challenges of working in mainstream organisations, and often, as we know, for a lot of us, it's almost like living the movie, the Groundhog Day, over and over again, right? And that's what you have to do. And I mean, I still do it in a lot of spaces that I'm working in with universities and that. But I'd kind of grown, I could, from a strategic perspective, I understood wholeheartedly while I'm at an organisation, I can still be and need to be involved with multiple other organisations, because there's there's a strategy in knowing what's happening across the sector with our stakeholders and all that kind of stuff, with our First Nations organisations, with our peak bodies, and the benefit of that. But I found myself in a situation where I was constantly having to almost justify why I was doing these other things with other people as well. And the other thing is that I'd learnt for a long time, one, that it was too easy for people to say it's too hard to engage with mob. We can't find the expertise, when in fact I know there's so many of us who have the expertise. And two, that I truly understand that that collective wisdom and expertise and leadership that we have is so strong, and that we need to be able to be self-determined in doing that. And that if I could build an organisation where we bring together the collective wisdom and the insights, and that also, I will say, has included and continues to include our non-Indigenous allies and champions who have specific expertise, but who understand our role in governance, bringing them in along the way as well to work with us. And so it was to have this self-determined place that really kind of centers on us just, in a lot of ways, demonstrating best practice all the time, having to go above and beyond, having to demonstrate often more than non-Indigenous service providers and organisations that what we're doing is right. And, you know, that also that when we have the opportunity to do consultation across the country and to engage community, that they can have trusted people to do that, which is also the modelling that we've got consultants all around the country who are local mob who work and live in those communities. So it's actually bringing authentic perspectives in. It's breaking down those barriers which stop mob from wanting to actually engage, and really giving them an opportunity to be heard. And I will say it's been quite powerful, and feedback that we get from community and mob and elders, and, you know, once they suss you out and they realise that you're not just fulfilling the needs of a service delivery, you know, kind of output or whatever. And we're very clear in that. Like, the company, over the short few years that we've been around, we knock back work all the time. If we think that what they're wanting to do is disrespectful to how we engage in communities, to not having enough time, to not resourcing enough, and potentially could do harm or is unsafe for our communities, we say no. And I think there's a powerful element in being able to do that, because it's about respecting our people.
When you're working with mob, do you think there's been an increase in mental health literacy that mob can actually understand and work with? And if not, how can we still increase the literacy for mob?
I think there has been to a certain degree, but that's so localised again. Like, where I've seen that done so successfully is where those local service providers and organisations have gone to the length of engaging local people in the community to co-design and co-develop resources. So the use of wording, the use of imagery, you know, really kind of understanding how to, you know, share messaging in a way that makes sense to us and is not in this kind of westernized use of language. There's a lot of research around communications that go out to the broader public around, you know, the level of literacy across the country. But then we have the added layer, particularly in some of our more rural and remote areas, around English being like the fifth language that some of our mob have learned. So the need to be able to be flexible and adaptable to that is still, I think, an ongoing journey. And at the same time, there's still been beautiful, you know, resources and programs that are adaptive. But that is only been successful where it's been run by those people in the community, right? They have to have the leadership on that. Yeah.
You talked a bit before about having good allies. But to you, what makes a person a good ally?
There's a few elements in that. And I would say the first one is that we, as First Nations people, actually acknowledge them as allies, not that they call themselves that. Yeah. Bless, because there's a lot of good-hearted, kind people who are like, I'm an ally, but actually don't necessarily engage with us in that way, or you know, kind of seek our leadership or guidance in how that can actually be worthwhile. So I think that's a big element around that they're actually someone that we seem to be an ally. And on that they also have the mutual understanding and respect to know that that means that the governance and the leadership in our shared messaging or areas of influence or things that we're trying to achieve, that sits with us, not with them, so that they know that they're not leading something, but they're just supporting what we're doing. I think those are kind of like the biggest. I mean, it's complicated depending on, you know, what kind of role they do, but I've seen it done even just recently, you know, with some funding that hopefully will be announced in the next month or so, where we had Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, you know, championing with government to get funding around these gaps and saying how it wasn't okay. But they took the leadership from us first before they started having those conversations. But they used their influence at the highest level to support where the gaps are for our people. And that is where the power comes in, that, where that respect is there, but they can see, they understand that it's not okay that this hasn't happened, and they've done what they can with their relationships and their networks to improve things, but not for them to take leadership or ownership of it, for us to actually do that.
Yeah. And I think you hit on a point there, that there are a lot of people that will call themselves allies, and they'll kind of use the words ally, but then they'll also go, I want to advocate for them, and I want to speak on their behalf, and I want to stand up for them. And the reality is we don't need people to do any of that for us, but we might need them to create the platform for us to be able to have our voices heard, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And on top of that, get permission from us before you, if you're going to be in a space where we can't, for whatever reason at that point in time, but you have had a conversation with us and expressed that, you know, based on what you've heard from us, that this is an issue. Is it okay if I bring this up and try and progress it? And this is what I'll, you know, and I'll feedback. That's fine. But as you said, don't think it's appropriate to sit in a space and talk on behalf of. Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned your lived experience a couple of times, and if people Google search you, they'll clearly see some of your lived experience. But the word cultural safety gets around quite a lot. So I'm going to ask you, in your lived experience, when you've been accessing services, what makes you feel culturally safe to engage with that service?
Yeah. It's actually not easy to, it's not easy to do. And I have to be honest in saying, and this is why I'm still doing the work that I'm doing, I haven't had many experiences where I've felt culturally safe in any service. There's elements in education that I've provided and seen services and organisations do, but as Black fellas, you know, we can see between the lines. We can see the stuff that might get you in the door. For example, if you can see that they've got a reconciliation action plan, or that they've got, you know, a statement of intent, like there's different things that you can kind of look at to see that there's at least been some kind of forethought. But it's pretty easy to tell when you get in as to the communication and interactions that you have with an organisation, that more often than not, it hasn't filtered down to the people of which you're actually engaging with. So I don't know that I've really had that. I've definitely, there's a few groups of organisations in the academic world and other organisations who have had specific individuals who've really understood it and tried to create that space for me and listen and grow and make changes. But more often than not, they're not willing to. And it certainly hasn't directly related to any services that I specifically have needed as a person with mental ill health.
Now, there's a lot of young people out there that are not connected to culture, that know they're Aboriginal and want to start knowing more. If they came to you and said, hey, Auntie, where do I start? What advice would you give those young people?
There's no straightforward answer to that, to be honest. And when I think about, even as myself, growing up as a young person, the different times that I had exposed to, but also then how I found such great strength in that connection to culture as I was able to build it is it's one step at a time. It's like, what would it like for you to get connected to culture? What does that look like? I think it's that kind of having someone who can have a reflective conversation where we're not pushing them into situations that could feel uncomfortable, but also we're encourage them to go on a gentle journey of reconnection. So is that we link them in with local elders group or, First Nations youth services to just start to kind of step them into it. What does this mean around their identity? Because there's a lot of harm that can come with our mob as well that try and do that. And particularly, having experienced this myself, the stuff around we don't look Aboriginal, you're not Aboriginal, that kind of stuff. And so I think it's about young people having someone safe that they can actually talk to about, what are you wanting from this? What would it look like for you? And stepping it back into small steps rather than thinking it has to be everything all at once, because I think the journeys are so individualized based on lots of things. There's reasons behind why, you might be disconnected, and there's reasons behind why you haven't been able to have these connections before, but there's always little steps that you can take that will, I think, increase that connection and understanding.
Yeah. Do you still think there's a big misunderstanding in community about the extreme numbers or the percentages of Aboriginal people with mental health issues and where people think some of the trauma comes from?
Yeah, and I think it's because we still just don't talk about a lot of it. It's just our norm. It just is what it is. It was only a few months ago when I was talking to my sister about this, who has FND, so that's functional neurological disorder, but she has it to a debilitating degree. For those who don't know, essentially what it means is that because of her extreme trauma, it's stuffed the wiring in her brains. So physically, when emotions and stuff are spoken about, she'll start not being able to say words. Her body will freeze up, like a really visceral response. What we were talking about, and she goes, because I was saying to her, she goes, well, a lot of people don't understand and they get upset and they're like, I'm sorry. And she's like, well, you don't need to be sorry. It's not your fault. It just is what it is. But she goes, remember when we were growing up? I was like, yeah. She goes, oh, just whatever. It is what it is. Get on with it. Like, you just kind of keep going and you don't, process the really traumatic experiences, the complex grief and loss that you never really process, the having to just kind of harden up, get on, don't necessarily ask for help. And I think that is still a big thing in our communities. And I see pockets of it, where people choose to embrace their own truth and their feelings and not be shame around sharing where they're coming from. For example, when before we kicked this session off, we had a quick check-in and I was telling you, like, nah, mate, I haven't been okay. Like, I've been in a dissociative state. This is happening, that's happening, but still making a conscious choice to move forward. And over the last couple of days, I've been in board meetings. I've been, doing different things. And at times I'll choose to have my camera off and that. But for me, I've found that empowering because I don't have to be shameful around what I'm experiencing, but I'm still choosing to come and participate in things that actually fill my cup, even when I'm dealing with this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think there's still a lack of understanding. I think there's still just this colloquial Australian, suck it up, harden up attitude that has been embedded in us as people, unless you're in spaces where you have that safety, where people actually have the conversation. So it's a mixed bag.
Now, a lot of organisations like APRA, for example, that accredits, a lot of health workers right across the country, GPs, doctors, nurses. Have you seen an increase in mental health training within the courses that traditionally never actually had mental health components in it? If that makes sense. Like years ago, like a nursing course didn't have much psych training in it because you'd have to become a psych in order to do it, or occupational therapy, where people wouldn't think there was any mental health issues, but now the courses are quite full with mental health units. Are you seeing more courses and professions saying we do work with people with mental health issues and we do need to be aware of them?
Yes and no. So I still know that mental health is considered, and suicidality is considered, an area of specialty for GPs, which I think is ridiculous, because I've been and heard of people going to GPs wanting to talk about it, and they're like, oh, sorry, we'll have to refer you to someone else that's not an area of specialty. It's like, no, that's just people living their life and coming to you and saying they're distressed. So that still does play out. However, yes, I have seen an increase, and I've seen an increase in actually First Nations literature and understanding in that. So an example, well, a couple of things. Like, I actually, for Queensland Health, wrote the script for what is the First Nations suicide risk assessment training that all of Queensland Health staff have to do around risk assessment in the ED. So they actually have integrated that, and I did some stuff around their years and years early learning training program as well for Queensland Health staff that has the First Nations perspective. So I've seen that. Another example is Legal Aid Australia, who recently, my company was engaged to do a piece of work for them where we supported the development of First Nations specific mental health trauma informed training for all of the legal aid staff around Australia, so that they could understand that when people are coming and needing support through their services, that there is often some quite complex mental health challenges and things that sit behind that, and it can't always just be a straight, this is what we have to get into. You have to acknowledge and understand why someone might not be able to engage the way in which you need them to, answer the questions, and how you have to respond appropriately. So it has increased, but sometimes you still just can't get that kind of perspective from people, because I've my own experiences even being an ED, and people look at you with disdain, like you're just wasting resources because you're there after, attempting to end your life, essentially.
The question, in the research field, I think there's still a lot of Australians, and I try to explain it in training too, but they go, how come there isn't a lot of research with Aboriginal people and eating disorders, or not a lot of research with Aboriginal people and gambling, and a lot of research with a lot of people with Aboriginal people and suicide? My question is, why isn't, I suppose there has been research done, but why is it we're still so far behind in being able to do some of these researches?
I think it just has never been, like, particularly the eating disorder stuff, which, was you and I have that connection, and there's not really been anyone at the right level who's been able to really push it up on the agenda, that they go, well, actually, we're decades behind everyone else in this country, but it's an issue. And that has been the challenge in various areas. It's the stuff around being over-researched. It's around what can we actually get prioritised. But I think personally a challenge has been, and I've called people out, I don't know, sometimes I can be a little controversial, but I've been like, why are you conducting an evaluation in these First Nations community using your research methodologies and a non-Indigenous organisation? Because it's successful, or that, we want more of, we would be looking at different things as to what you're looking at, and I still remember, like, being presented with well, Leilani, if we did that for you, we'd have to do that for everyone. No. When we do already have research that shows that how we assess something or evaluate something is different to the westernised framework, then there is precedence in the need to actually do it differently if you want real information from that. The other thing is people's unwillingness to engage, which we understand why. What's going to happen with this? What are you going to do with it? What is the point if you're just going to produce a report or something and it's not ever going to be used to affect change?
Yeah.
So lots of reasons, really.
I think I have one more that I was just thinking of, and I know I've talked a bit about it when I get asked that question too, is that if you want Aboriginal people to share some of those stories and some of those life experiences, and I'm talking about my eating disorder, I'm talking about the gambling. If I tell you how bad it really is to a non-Indigenous researcher, will that information get used against me personally? And what does the researcher ethically have to do if I've told them, like, I gamble so much that my kids don't get to eat this week, or I've not been doing too well mentally, without you think I can't look after my kids and my grandkids, and you're going to call child protection on me as well. So that's that personal level. Well, why participants are kind of scared and communities are kind of scared that we don't want the, what do you call it? You don't want the researched people to be the victims or the perpetrators of, even though you're trying to find out information at the same time. You get what I'm saying? Yeah.
Totally. And that's also the challenge of academic researchers anyway, because if they're working with mob, what processes have they done or undertaken to actually know that they're going to have the right kinds of conversations, that they're not going to be reactive when we're sharing trauma things because they're not used to hearing about it. But for us, it just is what it is. So then becomes a triggering event when they're sitting there going, oh, that's terrible. And we're like, oh, well, like those things can be really disparaging. And definitely 1,000%, you're right. Like, why would you, if you don't know what it's going to be used for, if you don't know you're going to be kept safe, why would you be 100% honest around anything like that, especially when you don't know the person, right? We're relational. We're about relationships and connections. And said that I've done this, with psychologists and stuff like that. Stop thinking you're going to get someone and sit across a room from them to divulge the most deepest of darkest of thoughts and feelings and hurt and pain if you don't spend the time building a relation and a level of connectivity, which I think goes back to your point around training and education, in particularly, in academia, that the need to really understand those micro skills almost, but that sense of connection. I always like to use the analogy of, when you're sitting yarning with your friends or talking to people and you're talking about things that are pretty full on, you're usually sitting next to them at a table or on a couch or even in, a car or whatever. You're not in this kind of confrontational thing. You wouldn't walk up to someone at a bus stop and say, hey, blah, 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 without introducing yourself, without disclosing some things about yourself. There is a need to get out of this, oh, we can't do this and we can't do that. Well, actually, you can. You can choose to share stuff about yourself that won't necessarily tell someone exactly where you live or all of your personal details. But geez, it'll go a long way in supporting, building a relationship of trust and respect and actually supporting them to want to share with you.
Yeah. I'm watching the time, but I've got 2 final questions for you. And the first one always involves my magic wand.
Ooh.
And my magic wand and $1 zillion that I've got. And if I handed you that $1 zillion and my magic wand and said you could fix something in Aboriginal affairs, what would you do? What would you pick? Why would you do it? It's endless zillions.
Endless zillions. For me, it would just be giving the money, resourcing, time and support to people in community to be self-determined and addressing their own issues, to allow them to set their own priorities, to respond to it appropriately, to not have to worry about funding or resourcing or, yes, you have to be accountable. So some level, I won't say no reporting, some level of reporting, but just being able to, and by the way, everyone, this is Bella. She likes to make regular appearances in most of my meetings, which is good. Sometimes you'll see a cat too.
Hi, Bella.
There's something in the tone around when I'm wrapping something up. I swear, usually within like 5 minutes or so of me wrapping something up, she rocks up and says, hello, I can sense that you're finishing. But yeah, I would give it to communities, like in a way that empowered them, that actually allowed them to be self-determined, to have the courage and to actually prioritize and address the things that are stopping us from living longer, happier, healthier lives, whatever that looks like. I mean, that's across our, social, emotional well-being, social, political, cultural determinants of health. It's across all those things, but I would give it back to them to do it instead of farming it out and having other people do it and not necessarily having the leadership of our mob and our communities in that. So I think that's what I'd choose.
Yeah, I like that. My last question is, what would you like people to walk away from our yarn this afternoon?
I think my biggest thing would be, doing any work is challenging. Working with mob is challenging. Working with government and organisations is challenging. And my one bit of advice and takeaway for everyone, no matter what your age and what you're doing, is to don't give up. To find the people in this space who understand and appreciate what you're doing and who can be part of your support network, to lean on each other. It takes, change takes time, but you are going to be challenged in ways that sometimes you probably wouldn't even predict. And if it wouldn't been even for yourself, AJ, at different times when we've been able to reconnect, when our paths have crossed, the support you've given, and hopefully that you've felt given by me, and it's the same with others, people that you can check in on that keep you going. I have, mentors and people that I just look up to where I'm like, oh, you've been doing this so much longer than me, almost in a way, suck it up, but talk about it, debrief. And keep going. If there's one thing that I've learned is that in your lifetime, you will never truly know how many people you have affected or helped in a good way, because you play different roles, you do different things, you don't always get to hear those stories. But if you keep trying and if you keep doing it, no matter what, then you are helping. So that would be my biggest takeaway from this. Just keep going, but with care and kindness for yourself and prioritising that, because myself and many others have experienced, extreme burnout, cultural load and the rest of it. And that's because, when you're caring, kind, giving person who wants things to be better for other people, it's a really easy thing to do. So I'll say you need to have that balance and that. Prioritise yourself, your family and mob first, and do what you can outside of that, and don't put too much pressure and stress on yourself, because you're making a difference even though you might not see it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, just to add to that, was what you said before, is we also need to learn sometimes to say no. And sometimes no is okay.
Yeah, totally.
Well,
like a new favourite word now.
Just like, no.
Yeah.
I want to say, joining us, you know how much I love you and I respect you and admire the work that you do. And I'm always here, as always. But guys, I want to thank Leilani for joining us today. Thank you very, very much. I know you're so busy and you've squeezed us in between meetings. So thank you very, very much.
No, thank you. And for all that you're doing. I mean, it's so good. These podcasts are brilliant. It's being able to share things more broadly, and you work tirelessly. I always say, I don't know how the heck you bloody do it, but you just keep going and going, irrespective of what you're dealing with. And, you provide that leadership and support to us because you care so much, and that filters through to everyone else. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. I'll see you at the next podcast.
See ya.